It was the first time it happened that I truly knew fear. I had no idea it was possible to feel so vulnerable and yet so aware of everything around me. I had just fallen asleep, perhaps for a few minutes, when I suddenly woke up. Or at least, I thought I had woken up. My eyes were open. I could see the room around me, the dim light from the lamp in the corner, the shadows cast on the walls, the door slightly ajar. But my body didn't respond. At first I thought it was just a strange sensation, some kind of temporary numbness, but when I tried to move my arm, nothing happened. My muscles felt rigid, heavy, as if an invisible force was pinning them to the bed. Breathing became more difficult. The air seemed not to enter my lungs, and despair began to take over me. I wanted to scream, call for help, but not even my voice would obey me. So I felt it. First, it was a subtle change in temperature, a cold, barely perceptible breeze that made the air around me feel heavy, suffocating. Then came that unmistakable feeling that I was not alone. A presence was becoming more and more evident, although there was no one there. I could feel a pair of eyes fixed on me, watching me from some dark corner of the room. The skin on my body, although motionless, seemed to crawl, and a primal fear shot up my spine, a sensation I had never experienced before. It was then that I saw her. At first, it was just a dark smudge on the edge of my vision, something that seemed like it wasn't part of the room. But little by little, it formed and took on a more defined shape. A tall figure with indistinct features that seemed to float in the darkest corner close to the ceiling. He had no face, or at least I couldn't see one, but there was something about his presence that was overwhelmingly evil. It was as if I could feel his intent, his hunger for something that was beyond my understanding. That figure didn't move immediately. She just remained there, hovering, as if studying me, as if waiting for the right moment to act. And I, trapped in my own body, had no way to escape. I was at the mercy of the unknown, and the only thing I could do was watch. It was at that moment that I realized how alone I was, how much that terror was mine and no one else's. After that night, I tried to forget. I tried to convince myself that it was just a dream. But then, it happened again, and again. Each time with greater intensity, as if something in that room was gaining strength with each visit. Episodes of sleep paralysis began to become frequent, almost a cruel and tortuous routine. I never knew when the next time would be. I just woke up trapped in my body, lying in that bed that turned into a prison, without being able to move a single muscle. The shadows in the room, once static, now seemed to be moving. It wasn't just a question of light and dark, of angles or reflections. The shadows were alive, crawling across the walls, distorting the shapes of the furniture, always getting closer. And then there was the sound. A low murmur, as if it were a whisper coming from all corners at the same time, without forming words, but filled with an ancient agony, a lament that echoed in my ears even after everything was over. The worst part was the figure. She was no longer just a figure in the corner of the room. Now, it was closer. With each episode, the distance decreased, as if every time I was paralyzed, she managed to get a few centimeters closer. I could see her more clearly, even though darkness still enveloped her edges. There was something about its contours that seemed to change, to distort. A feeling that what I was seeing did not belong to this world, something that seemed to fold in on itself, defying logic. Her presence was suffocating. My breathing became short, as if something was compressing my chest, and every time I tried to inhale, I felt as if the air was being knocked out of me. At one point, I swear I heard a voice. It wasn't exactly a sound, but a kind of noise that penetrated my mind, a low, almost indistinguishable vibration. It was as if something was trying to communicate, or worse, trying to invade my thoughts. On one of the most terrifying nights, I felt pressure around my neck. It was as if invisible hands had begun to squeeze, slowly and deliberately. I could feel the cold touch, the fingers that seemed too thin to be human squeezing my throat. At that instant, the figure's eyes shone. Yes, I saw them. Two bright spots emerging from the darkness where a face should have been. That's when I realized that she wasn't just an illusion, a creation of my brain stuck on the threshold between sleep and wakefulness. She was there, closer and closer, more and more real. And I was still unable to move, unable to escape that room where the air itself seemed to conspire against me. And no matter how the night ended, no matter how much the paralysis passed, the fear never left me. I knew she would come back, and I knew that next time I would be even closer. I was exhausted. Every night, the same anguish, the same overwhelming fear that never dissipated. I avoided sleeping, trying to stay awake as much as possible, but tiredness always ended up overcoming me. And inevitably, I fell into that state, stuck between sleep and wakefulness, where it all happened again. This time I felt something would be different. It was as if the air in the room was thicker, charged with an invisible electricity, something ready to rupture. It didn't take long for the paralysis to take hold of me again. My muscles tensed, my breathing became shallow, and I felt the crushing weight on my chest, as if a force beyond comprehension was crushing me against the mattress. I saw it immediately. The figure was now at the side of the bed, so close that I could feel the cold emanating from it, a cold that was unnatural, that seemed to come straight from the depths of something evil. She had sharper contours this time. The darkness around his body seemed to pulse, twisting like smoke, while the glow in his eyes grew more intense, mesmerizing. But what made me freeze inside was the movement she made. For the first time, that thing leaned toward me. I could see something that looked like a hand emerging from the darkness, stretching toward me, the fingers so long and thin they looked like claws. When she touched my forehead, it felt like a shock, not just physical, but mental. It was as if she had broken through a barrier and infiltrated my thoughts. Strange images began to invade my mind, flashes of places I had never seen but that seemed as real as anything I knew. Dark, twisted forests, damp, endless stone corridors, and worst of all, faces. Distorted faces screaming in silence, trapped in eternal pain. I could feel that these weren't just random visions. It was as if she was showing something, as if she wanted me to know where she had been, or perhaps where she intended to take me. It was then that everything made sense, and the terror reached a depth I had never known. I realized that the figure was not just any entity. It wasn't a ghost, a hallucination, or any manifestation of my subconscious. She was someone I knew. In the midst of all that despair, an old memory emerged from the depths of my past, the memory of a distant relative who had disappeared years ago, in an inexplicable way. There was something about the shape of the face that I could finally make out, a resemblance to the person who had once been so alive and present. I understood then that what I saw before me was not just a supernatural being, but the soul of someone who had been condemned to a horrible fate, and who was now somehow trying to drag me into the same abyss. The icy fingers on my forehead tightened, and I felt a tug, as if my very essence was being ripped from my body. But then suddenly everything stopped. The pressure, the cold, the shadows disappeared in the blink of an eye. I was able to move, finally. Panting, I sat up in bed, trying to understand what had happened. The figure was gone, as if it had never been there. But I knew she wasn't gone. I could feel her, deep down, waiting, watching. And I knew, with icy clarity, that she would return, because somehow she was part of me now, and she would never leave me alone.